Rifat Bey, çok teşekkürler ve iyi yolculuklar. I know you're on your way. So, ladies and gentlemen, hanımefendiler ve beyefendiler, iyi akşamlar, good evening. Rifat, thank you very much for that generous introduction and for using the short version of a biography, which is always much better than a long version. I'm a big believer in the Cliff Notes versions of official biographies. But more importantly, as Rifat goes out the door, thank you again for your leadership and your vision in supporting Turkish-American relations. TOBE's partnership with ATC, from my perspective, remains a powerful engine for sustaining and strengthening this vital relationship. I also want to acknowledge, General Jones, your leadership in investing not only in this organization, but in this relationship across several decades, in uniform, now in a suit, inside and outside government. Thank you. And I also want to welcome Major General Ulusoy here with us tonight, as well as Secretary Grant and other members of the U.S. government who are with us. And before turning to my remarks, I also want to take a minute to acknowledge our good fortune in having with us tonight one of the most knowledgeable and, I would say, stalwart advocates for this relationship for more decades than he would certainly want me to detail, and that's my predecessor in Ankara, Frank Ricciardoni. So, Frank, great to have you here. This conference and the relationships between ATC, TOBE, and other business associations on both sides of the Atlantic, including TAIC and the U.S. Chamber, continue to provide essential connections and context for all of us in these challenging times. And indeed, these are challenging times in Turkey and in the surrounding regions, and therefore, by extension, challenging times to a degree in our relationship. Every day, we absorb a drumbeat of alarming news detailing the violence, extremism, and the active conflicts to Turkey's immediate south and to its immediate north. Much of that news concerns threats to both countries, to our common humanity, and to the work we've done over the past generation to finish building a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And those threats obviously come from a variety of different quarters, from a Russian government that is challenging the basic tenet that borders in this day and age should not be changed by force, to the extreme terrorism of Daesh or ISIL and the ongoing conflict in Syria, to the threats Turkey itself faces from the PKK's violent attacks on the state, which are undermining the premise that the rights and freedoms of Turkey's Kurdish citizens are best advanced and protected through democratic institutions and electoral politics, not through IEDs and violence. In both capitals, our efforts to address these threats are complicated by an additional challenge at this day and age, and that is the perceptions that the U.S. and Turkey are increasingly headed in different directions, that we increasingly have different values and different objectives and fewer common interests. This is something I hear here in Washington. It's something I hear in Ankara and other parts of Turkey. It's something that I know many of you hear as well. There are several reasons, I think, why we are facing this perception challenge. I would put at the start of that the challenge of diplomacy in the digital age. We live and work in an era in which differences over individual issues or tactics are painted very rapidly in stark relief for all to see on a daily basis. And when remarks in political stump speeches are immediately interpreted as policy choices, as irrevocable decisions and commitments by one government or the other. Now, that's not to say there aren't differences in approach on some issues in Ankara and Washington, There are. Just as there are in every partnership and friendship between two countries, just as there were between the United States and Turkey 10, 20, 30 years ago. That's a natural part of relations between states. So why is it that today these differences feel so pronounced? I would argue that part of the reason is there are fewer people in Washington and in Ankara as taglines for two governments. There are fewer people who have a breadth of experience working with each other on common problems and challenges. And let me just cite a couple of examples of that on the American side. Over half, almost 60% of the U.S. Congress has taken office since 2008, 7 years ago. In the U.S. military, a generation of officers and personnel have come of age in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Horn of Africa, and other places where the fight against extremism and terrorism takes them, not in Europe, facing down Soviet aggression in defense of our shared values in the NATO alliance. And the domestic landscape doesn't help either, with its polarized politics, polarized media, and constant accusations of bias and favoritism. And that's just here in the United States. In Turkey, we see some similar dynamics, with the added complications of the renewed conflict with the PKK and the social and economic pressures created by Turkey's remarkable generosity in hosting more than 2 million refugees from Syria, Iraq, and other places like Afghanistan where they have been displaced by conflict. To put that in context for the Americans in the room, it's the equivalent of the United States absorbing roughly 8 million refugees in about 3 years. And if you think about the debate in our society over immigration and the challenges posed last summer by the arrival of unaccompanied minors from Central America, that number was 40, 50, 60,000, if I recall correctly. And you think about the challenge of absorbing 8 million people in 3 years. That gives you a sense of the challenge this creates in Turkish society. So we have our challenges, but I would remind all of us that despite those challenges, there are some real enduring strengths in the relationship. And I see evidence of those strengths every day in the depth and the intensity of the discussions and the work and the agreements between two governments on a wide range of issues. In recent months, we've seen some real concrete examples of those strengths and the results. Our military partnership remains very strong. We have intensified participation and cooperation together in the coalition against ISIL. Turkey opening its bases this summer to operations by the U.S. and coalition actors because of the proximity to areas under ISIL's control. Turkish bases are enabling us to have a much greater impact on the battlefield from the same set of forces, which is really important at this stage of the conflict as we work through the challenges with a smaller force and a very stretched force here in the United States. Adding to that, Turkish pilots are now flying strike missions against ISIL in Syria alongside other coalition partners. We took some time to work out the details to integrate Turkish aircraft into the coalition. With that now in effect, we see a strong Turkish commitment and the practical results of that in Syria from Turkey engaging in direct military operations. Now, obviously, we still have a lot of work to do across the coalition and with Turkey to address the threats that are posed to all of us by ISIL and to identify and squeeze the smuggling networks that are sustaining it. And those efforts by diplomatic, intelligence, law enforcement, finance, and other professionals are intensifying every month. President Obama will host Prime Minister Davutoglu and 100 other leaders tomorrow at the Leaders Summit on combating ISIL and violent extremism. This summit will highlight strides we've made in preventing the travel of foreign terrorist fighters and countering violent extremism, but it's also going to be a forum to announce some new commitments and initiatives in this area. We also see strong Turkish support and contributions to the range of measures NATO has implemented to counteract Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And Turkey is also playing a very constructive role, supporting the talks underway in Cyprus to try to finally achieve a settlement that has eluded the Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities for too long. Beyond the issues that attract the most attention, we see other areas of vitality in the relationship, one of the most important of which is economic growth and development. Despite slowing growth and uncertainty about the policy priorities of whatever government emerges from the November 1 parliamentary elections, Turkey, as all of the American companies in the room would attest, continues to command strong interest from U.S. companies, both for its internal market and as a platform for their operations in 3 regions. U.S. businesses, including a number here tonight, are creating jobs and supporting innovation. And to cite just a couple of examples, Ford Motor this year opened Turkey's its largest single R&D center near Istanbul with more than 1,000 engineers and technicians, which is developing climate-friendly engines that are being employed across Europe. 3M recently opened an innovation center that already has developed a heat insulation film for a Turkish refrigeration company, now being sold to a variety of European companies, with an expectation by 3M that they're going to triple the size of that facility in the next 5 years. So we see lots of potential for other companies to realize similar results, to contribute to Turkey's efforts to further innovate and generate a broader technological base and a more advanced technological base in the economy. And we continue to look forward to working with Turkey's next government to increase further trade and investment in both countries. Now, clearly, our success in realizing this shared goal is going to depend in part on our effort to successfully negotiate the transatlantic trade and investment partnership with the European Union, and to ensure that Turkish-American trade and investment can capitalize on this liberalized framework as well. As you know, in 2013, President Obama and then Prime Minister Erdogan set up the high-level committee to address Turkey's concerns about the impact of TTIP on Turkey, and it remains an important forum to address these vital issues. More broadly, our success in realizing this vision of growing trade and investment, of sustaining and strengthening this relationship going forward, is going to depend in part on the policy choices of Turkey's next government, which itself will depend on the choices of Turkey's electorate and the choices they make on November 1st. There is great interest, obviously, and I would say some concerns in both capitals, both countries, about this election. And clearly there is a lot at stake in this election. We believe it is important for all of Turkey's citizens to have the opportunity to make an informed choice and to exercise their duty and obligation to vote in these elections. That is going to require a vibrant, independent media that provides citizens a range of views and perspectives regarding the challenges Turkey faces today, and information on the policy options that the respective parties are proposing to address them. But it also means, importantly, that voters must feel on Election Day safe enough to go to the polls. And we believe strongly that anyone notably the PKK, but anyone else in Turkey that attempts to prevent the creation of a secure environment for voters is obviously in the wrong. There's another type of investment that's essential to the future health of our relationship, and that is the investment we make together in the next generation of Turks and Americans, now coming of age in a very different world from the one in which all of us first came to this relationship. In this area, I think we see enormous opportunities and some real dynamism. This year alone, over 10,000 Turkish students are pursuing higher education opportunities at American universities. We have welcomed this year the largest cohort ever of American Fulbright grantees to Turkey, including over 100 English teaching assistants who were teaching at 40 different Turkish universities. We've supported hundreds of professional exchanges over the last decade, bringing up-and-coming Turkish leaders from government, business, civil society on programs to network with American counterparts. We're working together in science, technology, and health, including projects to jointly develop affordable medical technologies and train doctors on advanced techniques for cancer testing. And we also agreed in the last year to increase cooperation on climate change and deforestation. And so this is a really vital area of investment that all of us, I think, feel the urge and the need to continue to reinforce. But in parallel with this, I would posit that there's one more group in Turkey in which Turks and Americans alike must invest, and those are the Syrians, Iraqis, and others displaced by conflict. We're grateful for all that Turkey has done to protect and assist these vulnerable refugees, and we know that Turkey can't do it all by itself. That's why President Obama, Secretary Kerry are focused this week at the General Assembly on mobilizing additional resources to support the frontline states, hosting the vast majority of Syrian and Iraqi refugees. We continue to devote the bulk of our assistance, which is now over the $4.5 billion mark, to support Syrians and Iraqis inside those countries who still feel safe enough to remain in their communities so that they don't become additional numbers of refugees in neighboring states, adding to the challenges that Turkey and the other frontline states face. In Turkey, U.S. government support now totals $325 million, which is building and maintaining new schools, providing meals for the poor, mental health services for victims of trauma, and some other types of assistance, including, starting this year, some vocational training to help some Syrians develop the tools they need to provide a future for themselves. Given the limits on what individual governments can do, though, there's an aspect to this challenge that I would ask all of you to think carefully about and try to find ways to contribute to in addressing this challenge. And that is the challenge in Turkey of educating the 600,000 Syrian children living there today. Now, the good news is that 200,000 of them are in school, most of them in a second day, if you will, in Turkish facilities, thanks to the generosity, again, of the Turkish government and Turkish non-governmental organizations who have made that work. But that means that there are 400,000 Syrian kids who are not in school. If you set aside the humanitarian imperative of helping them, which is itself compelling, it's important we think about the real security risks we will face in 5 and 10 and 15 years if these children have no education, no prospects, and become the next generation of recruits for extremists. The government of Turkey is taking many proactive steps to get these children into school, but it is an enormous undertaking. So I would ask you all to support the efforts of the Turkish government through AFAD and the efforts of NGOs to get more of these kids off the streets and back in school. Many needs teachers, buildings, transportation, school supplies, creative solutions to support schooling outside of schools, language training, use of technology. We have a network of organizations that are active doing this work. The American Business Federation in Turkey's been very generous in helping do matchmaking between companies and NGOs. For those of you who are looking for outlets for your corporate social responsibility, if you would like our assistance to try to connect you with some of those organizations, we'd be happy to do so. But I would ask you please to give that some thought. And just to conclude, every day in Turkey, as I've just detailed, I see the deep and enduring relationship that our countries have shared and built for 2 decades. I will certainly be making the case every day for better cooperation, more investment, and the ongoing constructive, candid exchanges we have on the challenges we face together. We need all of you to continue to be doing the same thing. Most importantly, to be helping others to see the stories and the reality of the cooperation and the health of this relationship behind the scenes, behind the headlines every day, behind the rhetoric every day, so that we can continue to build a stronger relationship based on an honest assessment of where we are, but also reflecting the deep and enduring values and commitments we've had to this relationship over many years. ATC and its members play an exceptionally important role in making that case. I look forward to working with all of you to continue to make that case and to hearing more about the ideas and initiatives that develop through this conference. I want to thank all of you for being here, participating in this conference. Look forward to seeing you either here in Washington or more importantly in Turkey in the weeks and months to come. And thanks very much for all you're doing for the relationship.